not live streamed at the moment, so there's probably a lot of people have tuned in to see about company constitutions and the value of them and so on. And look, this is part of sort of an evolving process.
Sorry, B, just because it is on being recorded, we might just whip around and do introductions again, just so if you're watching, someone knows who's in the room.
Yes. Yep. So, kia ora, B. Karen, Chief Executive, Timaru District Council.
Do you want to? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Mayor Nigel.
Stu Piddington, Councillor.
Councillor Michelle Pye, good morning.
Good morning, Councillor Scott Shannon.
Kia ora, Gavin Oliver.
Good morning, Stacey Scott.
Morning, Councillor Owen Jackson.
Kia ora, Councillor Sally Parker.
Councillor Alan Booth.
Thank you. And it looks like we've got apologies from Councillor Burt, and we've also got in the room Tony Howie, the Chair of VT, Nigel Davenport, Chief Executive of VT, and Fraser Munro, General Manager of TDHL, amongst some other supporting staff. Thank you. I'll pass back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So we've got two council-controlled companies, Venture Timaru and Timaru District Holdings Limited, and both of them have constitutions, and constitutions are core charter documents that define the relationship between the company, the shareholders and the directors, because each have a different role and play different parts. And I provided a link to the current constitutions, and I really did that for some, if anyone wanted to go and have a look at them. Both of them are very long, wordy documents running 30, 40 pages and carry quite a lot of superfluous information. And by superfluous, both of them contemplate, for instance, that if the company's going to transfer its shares, it gives preemptive rights and the shares go in proportion to the existing shareholders. Well, there's one shareholder. So, of course, all of that is redundant. There's only one shareholder, and you don't need to have regard to other shareholders. When you come to the sale of the shares, it's a pretty, if you ever came to the sale or disposal of some of the shares, it would be a pretty straightforward process because you're only dealing with one shareholder. So that was, and so those constitutions, and in actual fact, if you were to go and look at the one for Venture Timaru, it goes right back to when the company was incorporated or shortly thereafter, and it's just a stock standard one that was rolled out for small, closely held companies probably 10, 15 years ago. And it's had a couple of amendments in there, but they are not really the sort of constitutions you'd expect to see for council-controlled organisations. So, as part of the process of enhancing the governance, the oversight, and making sure there's a consistency between the two entities, particularly when you get the companies appointing appointing directors, the way the AGMs are managed and so on, it seemed appropriate that they should mirror one another and there should be a consistency between these two documents. So as I said before, the purpose of a company constitution governs the relationship between the company directors and shareholders, and constitutions for one shareholder companies like VT and TDHL are quite different to constitutions for companies with multiple shareholders, as they are for companies that are listed on the exchange. So it's about creating documents that are fit for purpose. So here's why do we want these new companies? Look, it's really to reflect that they are structured for a one shareholder company, and that company is a community owned or is a public benefit entity. That's the council. We want to integrate it with our external governance appointments policy, because actually that's a really important document about how you appoint the governors of these entities. And so having constitutions that are consistent with that policy is important, because it gives visibility to the community about how the governors are appointed, That's the governors of the companies, that process that's followed, and then how they're expected to run the company. And so what it does is enable a very clean structure between the Constitution and the policy for everybody to understand who's playing what role and how they perform that clearly. The constitutions in this, the new proposed or draft constitutions are shorter and simpler. They run to 6 pages instead of 30 or 40. They integrate with the external governance appointments policy, and we have made and tracked those changes. So I think the next slide was to work through what those significant changes were and a comparison of them. Yes, yeah. And before we go there, are there any questions on, yeah, there we go, on, if you like, the background or the context to having a change of the constitutions?
Just one question, B. Does this have any effect on, say, a shareholders' agreement or potentially shareholders' agreements?
No, if anything, I think it probably makes it easier to have a shareholder agreement if you, because there's more flexibility built into it. So I think that what you've got here, I would expect that it's actually easier than the old one, particularly the VT one, which is quite prescriptive. Comfortable, I can work through what the major changes are, because what's proposed here is that we bring back a report to Council, because it will be Council that needs to adopt the new constitutions. We bring them back after this discussion, and there are a few, only a handful, but they're really quite important issues around the appointment of chair and appointment of directors and term and so on. We would bring those back with the new constitutions and the amended policy for you to approve and adopt at a council meeting, with the intention that they take effect from the next AGM, which is in a month's time. Just if it's, Your Worship, if it's okay, I'll just check whether the VT or TDHL representatives have anything they wish to add at this point before going through the comparison. Sure, yep. Oh.
Yeah,
How's time? Yeah.
perhaps, Tony, if you want to, and Nigel, whoever's talking, want to pop up and add them now before we work through these.
So, Your Worship and Councillors, so generally we're pretty happy with the changes, and they make sense, and it makes sense to simplify and align the constitutions. That makes sense. So there was 3 points that we raised when it came to us to make submissions on it to the lawyers. So the first thing is that we suggested that te reo should be added in the constitution in terms of the especially the headings within the constitution. Te reo, yeah. And secondly, the VT board would have preferred to see mana whenua representative on the board. So, yeah.
Certainly, Councillor Pye, this is a workshop, it's a discussion. I might remind, there's no decisions made here. It's just to bring forward the discussion, and we'll bring a report back. And I mean, but it is helpful, we thought, for people to understand the issues here.
I don't agree with that being in the Constitution. I think the skills matrix is the place for that. I don't think we haven't included in that draft constitution any makeup of the board, not even elected members versus members of the public. So I don't think it should be in the constitution. It should be reflected in your skills matrix, and that's where you target the skills, diversity and background that you're looking for around your board table like any other board. I don't think I've ever seen any constitution that would have that in it, but maybe it's not something I read on a regular basis.
The discussion we had with the legal counsel that was looking at Venture Timaru and TDHLs came back to us and agreed it shouldn't be in the constitution, but we were of the understanding that it was to be discussed as part of the, to be included potentially in the council's, what are they called? The external governance appointments policy. And the purpose really at the end of the day for VT, the board's discussion was pretty unanimous on it, that as effectively a service organisation, a community service organisation, to further enhance and evidence the authentic relationship we have with mana whenua, we believed it was important to have that as and it's not a skill, I don't think. It's not a skill or an individual thing that each of the members should or possibly have around the table. It's actually talking to the authentic relationship we have that we wish to enhance with mana whenua. So I agree, not in the constitution, but we were the understanding that it was going to be part of the discussion or draft external governance appointments policy, and we see it's not in there, so that's the reason we wanted to raise it.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing, sorry, I'll let you go in a moment, Councillor Scott. The key thing that we get through these, whether it be policy or constitution, that we end up with directors that are contributing to the conversation and adding value. So, you know, and that's probably going to come out of the skills matrix and reviews as such. Councillor Scott.
Ed, if I put on my YMCA chair hat for a wee moment, we do in our constitution have mana whenua rep, but it has been a 10-year relationship. So for the first, been on the board maybe almost 10 years, and for the first 3 years it was developing our relationship with ara whenua to actually put that in our constitution. It was very much a work in progress. So for the last 7 years we have had a representative at the table, but it's definitely a lot of work that needs to go into that relationship before I would embed it in a constitution. That's our own personal journey at the Y. It adds a lot of value to our space, youth development and supporting our Māori children within South Canterbury and Mid Canterbury, but it's been a very long journey and one that has to be initiated with mana whenua, not led by an organisation. So that's just my only warning to that. It is very much should be led from the other direction rather than one way.
Third point.
Yes, so currently, as the Constitution, the directors within Venture Timaru elect the chair and vice chair. So under the new proposal, that's quite a departure from that. We would, the board of Venture Timaru would prefer that it stays the way it is, and we would contend that in a commercial boards outside of council-controlled organisations, it is best practice that the actual board itself elects the chair and vice chair. So we would prefer that, but of course, whatever seems to be appropriate.
And just on that, we do note that the Constitution has the words shall/may in the Constitution.
Yes, I think that to that point, it's really, and this is not a decision, but I think a decision has to be made by council when the report comes as to who will determine the chair, and so the company the shareholder, is it shall, in which case they do appoint, or may, in which case they leave it open, and that will be a decision for you to make at the meeting about that rather than closing it down here. So, because that is a key decision, but it's one when it comes to council, and so you might want to think about that. Is it one where the council will appoint, or is it one where the council may appoint, in which case they would just hand it over to the company, or say, no, on this occasion we will do it ourselves. So that's really that purpose, that's the purpose of that there.
And another potential option around that would be for VT to, or the Venture Timaru to actually make a recommendation to council for the chair and vice chair, and then that to be endorsed by the council. So that's another way of approaching it. And I've seen that happen in other organisations successfully.
So we have a preference for the word may, but having said that, all directors to Venture Timaru are appointed by council in any event. So clearly they have passed the test, so to speak. So you would anticipate that any one of those would be acceptable from a chair perspective.
Is there a reason why TDHL is different to VT, or is that just a hangover from how they were set up originally? Because they are different, aren't they?
Yeah, at the moment, that's correct, Councillor Pye. At the moment they are, as they stand. TDHL, the shareholder, that's council, appoints the chair and the deputy chair. VT appoints, the directors do the appointing, and that's why we're suggesting under these constitutions you may wish to give consideration to whether or not they are mirror one another, or you allow that practice of the differences to continue. But that's, so they're at the moment different, yes.
Over, like, you know, we've been very, very keen to update our constitution for some time, because it was an off-the-rack one when it was set up however many years ago, and to bring it current. And it may be just reflective of, yes, they're two council-controlled organisations, but one's very much a trading, for-profit, dividend-producing commercial entity, and the other one is very much a community service entity, for want of a better word.
Be hard to know, but I suspect it's historical somewhere along the line.
I think so. That's all we had to.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. So those are the points, and that last one around the election, appointment of chair and deputy chair is the use of the term may shall. Particularly the appointments, to the points of Councillor Scott, the appointments policy and so on are around process and making sure you have a process by which these appointments occur that's very transparent. So often they'll often be lean on, if you like, who you want, but more about the process that we follow in order to get the right skills in there. So there's a lot of colour can go into different documents like the skills matrix. If I just work through here, and I don't think there's any on these, as I said before, the issue of shares under the old constitutions, they really were in the contemplation that you had more than one shareholder. Here you've got one shareholder, it's pretty straightforward. You have a conversation with the shareholder and you issue the shares, and it was done some time ago, back in about 2019, I think, with TDHL, where there were some excess imputation credits, and it was distributed as a share issue. So look, it happens, but it's pretty straightforward. Same with the transfer of shares. I mean, there's no one to transfer them to at the moment. You'd have to bring in a separate shareholder. So it goes without saying that you would need to have the approval of the shareholder for any transfer of shares. And that may well, given that there's CCOs and the nature of it, may well involve a conversation with the community as well. It wouldn't necessarily be a straightforward process. This here, the appointment of directors, a key function of the shareholder, and this provides for directors to be appointed and removed by council as the sole shareholder. And it gets, I mean, special resolutions are ones which really have to take place in this form. You have to have either 75% or more of the members agreeing and so on. Again, when you've got one shareholder, it's academic. because the shareholder, it's 100% or it's nothing. Really, it just tidies up a provision and makes it consistent for a one shareholder company. A minimum and maximum number of directors. Now, this is, you may wish to, this is an important point. We've got some minimum and maximum in there at the moment. You may wish to change that. Either way, you might wish to say, well, we certainly want to make sure we've at all times got a minimum number of directors, 3, or you may wish to leave it open-ended.
I just have a question on that, and it depends what the policy looks like, because at the moment the policy contemplates 2 elected members, but I think we've already changed that, haven't we? But if we have 2 elected members and elected members can't outnumber independents, you can't have a minimum of 3.
Yes, so we need to, and that's where tidying up the policy and the constitution becomes quite important, to make sure the 2 are consistent.
But do we want to contemplate that we may change our mind in the future around elected members and therefore have a minimum of 4 rather than 3, assuming that you wouldn't have, I don't know, it's just, you could get out of kilter there.
Or the other way to look at it is, because we've got at least 2 directors must be elected members, and we've moved away from that with TDHL, and that's not actually the case with VT either, so we need to check.
Yeah, and that's why we want to tidy it up for the AGM, because at the moment you're still compliant, but come the AGM that needs to be, potentially needs to be tidied up, depending on who's appointed.
My other question is, it talks about serve 3 or more terms. Should there be a maximum term that someone should serve on those boards?
I don't think so.
That's a good discussion point, because the problem that you've got is if you have 3-year terms as an example, but then you've got leadership of a board and they are going through certain strategic things, and then because of your constitution they have to be removed when actually they've been, as the chair, potentially been leading a whole lot of work. So I think I'm supportive of the question in regard to good governance practice. It sort of applies to boards, but it doesn't apply to elected members, is often the case. It's how you, unless there's a clause that supersedes it, if it was the case. Yeah, I don't know. That's just my thinking on it.
I agree with Nigel on that one. I fully support what you're saying, Stu, but I think the shareholder needs to make that decision. You never want to have to get rid of somebody off the board just because of what's in your constitution. Common sense would say you'd probably do it anyway, but you don't want to be forced into a position. That's my view. But
yeah, I was just going to say, so the policy contemplates 3 by 3, but does allow, it's got some wording there, that council may invite a person to serve longer than 3 complete terms if it believes it's in the interest for this to occur. So the wording to the policy contemplates that you're not, that the sort of standard term, if you like, might end at 9 years, but does contemplate that you can bring them on. So that's again where the policy's trying to build a bit of flex to give you that option to go to someone and say, actually, we know you've done 9 years, but it would be helpful if you stayed for a bit longer. Would you be open to that? So that is in there in the policy if you wish it, but the policy also, I think, indicates that after 3 terms of 3 years, generally in the ordinary course, you probably wouldn't be reappointed, but doesn't preclude it.
Yeah, well, it seems weird you'll either have it one way or another. Why put it in if we're going to ignore it? In terms of the 3 threes, why